somebody's got to sit in the dank basement and look at those all day to see if anybody's testing nukes. How many people have thought to themselves, oh, they're working with the government, like this customer has no idea what they actually want? We're seeing a lot of, with Palantir and Anduril, that this is the new paradigm, which Ford said, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have told me they wanted a faster horse.
All right, welcome back to the next episode of the Kill Chain podcast. Today, got a very interesting guest, background in military, defense tech, AI, logistics, some pretty exciting news that they just got accepted into a local accelerator that I'm sure we'll dive into. So Jorden, welcome to the Kill Chain podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited that you guys are doing this and happy to be here.
Yeah, this has been fun. It's new. It's been a great learning experience, and really excited to dig in. So to start, do you want to kind of give just your background, like who are you, where did you come from, and what are you doing?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So as you mentioned, military background. When I was a kid, I always wanted to be a pilot, so that was the dream. But coming out of high school, that somehow got lost on the way, and I decided, well, I'm going to join the Air Force and maybe go officer. Figure it out from there. And this was around 2012, so like right after the recession, and there was just not a lot of jobs. So I was like, let's just join up, right? Because I was like, college is expensive and maybe not the best option. So joined up and got into a really cool career field just sort of by chance called 9S100 or Technical Application Specialist. And had a great time. It's a very like physical science based career field, and the whole point is really like nuclear treaty monitoring. It's sort of all built around that, kind of taking its lineage from a lot of the nuclear detection we started doing in the early Cold War, right after World War II. Worked most of my time at AFTAC, as most of that career field does. It's the Air Force Technical Application Center in Florida, where I know you're also from. We both spent some time there down by Cape Canaveral and in Melbourne, Florida. So I spent my first 8 years of my career there, first doing seismic analysis, looking at squiggly lines. So we have a global sensor network of seismometers. And so somebody's got to sit in the dank basement and look at those all day to see if anybody's testing nukes. And, that was kind of a little bit soul crushing, but it was cool. But, you're just looking at squiggly lines all day. But I kind of did my time in that one. And then I got to do some of the more fun parts of that career field, which was working on a mobile R&D lab, doing basically collection of particulates. And when there's a suspected nuclear test with the nuke sniffer jet we have out here at Offutt, when we get those samples, we have to process them. So I got to do that, which was like an R&D thing, really fun. Did that for about 3 years. And then a couple odd jobs around AFTAC. I was a machinist for a few months doing like prototype machining parts. And then I got pulled up to do like some executive function CAG stuff. But then I came out to Offutt for the last 2 years of my career in the Air Force and got to actually fly. Figured I wanted to be a flyer for at least some part of it before I got out. And then what happened is I just came up on my re-enlistment and I was looking at the job offers, and that was when like a lot of the COVID inflation stuff was happening and job offers were crazy in tech. I had gotten my undergrad in computer science while I was in, just like online, and decided that was the right time. Like I just got a great job offer on base though still, so I still got to be part of the mission, participate in this great community. And I worked at the Weather Wing as a software engineer at first, and then ultimately as a software project manager and product manager, basically, where I learned a ton about how global weather works for the military, as well as the contracting side of the DoD, which I had just never really been a part of and seen. I was just on the usage and user side. And then ultimately, as you mentioned, I started my own business, Aulendur Labs. So I won't get too far down. I'm sure we can get into the weeds a little bit more. But basically, it started with my co-founder, Aaron Parker, who was still active duty at the time, was on an SBIR board, just providing some feedback for how do these SBIRs work, right? And some feedback for whether it's technically feasible for this specific SBIR panel. And he gave me a call because we had been shooting business ideas back and forth, for years. And he's like, hey, these SBIRs are really cool. This might be a way for us to get some traction without having to quit our day jobs. Because like, I'm all about taking risks, but I've also got a wife and, a life and a mortgage, and I'm not trying to just quit for nothing. So there's a certain amount of calculated risk that's reasonable. And we had never landed on the right idea. And this was a great opportunity for somebody else to tell us, DTRA in this case, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, to tell us this is something we need someone to build. And so that was a little bit of a clearer path for us. And we got very fortunate that they had a solicitation that was for nuclear treaty monitoring, basically. It's not quite treaty stuff. They wanted to get some help on learning how nuclear plumes are going to actually, like, where is all that fallout going to go with the weather and forecasting and satellite data. It was just like a perfect match for our backgrounds. And so we won that SBIR solicitation and got started. And then we started looking at how can we turn that kind of core tech stack that we proposed into a broader commercialized business, right? The whole dual use point of SBIR. And that turned into the rest of Aulendur, which again, very briefly, our very aspirational idea is we want to forecast everything. So in the same way machine learning is being used to forecast global weather, we think, why can't we forecast where freight loads are going to go, how many ships are going to come into port here and there, what's going to be the crop yield of this specific area. So really all this amazing data that we have about the world, we want to create a digital twin and ultimately forecast on it. We know that's not something that's going to happen tomorrow, but our species, we think one day will have better forecasting of basically everything than we do today.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's really funny. So there's a lot to talk about there. So, I think when I met you, what was really interesting is you knew where Melbourne, Florida is.
Yep.
Like and from there, like it's very rare that you find somebody who actually knows what Melbourne, Florida is.
Right.
So when I describe it, I usually have to say, Cocoa Beach or Kennedy Space Center.
Right.
But yeah, growing up there was awesome because, the AFTAC building was just a staple of the Space Coast. And they had were you, they probably took the rocket garden down before you got there, didn't they?
Yeah, they still had some of it up. I did work in the old building for a little while before they put the new one up. But yeah, I saw the pictures. I mean, they were all over the inside of the building of like the heyday, which was just so cool.
It was cool. And as a kid, growing up on the Space Coast, you see every launch, the shuttle program was booming in the 80s and 90s. And then you go, drive down the beach, you get the rocket garden and stuff. So yeah, that was such a cool place, such a cool place. But so going back to the some of the work that you're doing now, when you talk about forecasting everything, it makes me think quantum computers.
Sure.
And I know like different companies have different, quantum computers at different stages. Like, have you guys looked at the quantum, or are you mostly just really focused on what you can do today? And, we'll get there when, Google or D-Wave or whoever, IonQ, like when somebody gets a viable quantum computer out, then worry about that piece.
More generalized quantum computer. I'll just be frank that quantum's not my area. And so it's not something that I feel super smart on. That said, I know a little bit. And my impression, my understanding, and I'm a technical guy. So like, I like to not really speak about things until I feel I kind of understand the bones of it. But what I do know from the little bit that I've read is that what quantum computers are very good at are like search problems. So, some of the classic algorithms like traveling salesman, if you're familiar, right? Which is, all of just for the audience, right? All of the different, you have a list of places you want to go. What is the most optimal path? And this is part of like the larger problem in computer science, which has been known forever, which is does P equal NP, right? Polynomial versus non-polynomial. And quantum computing basically being able to solve all of them in a superposition at the same time and then resolve that to the correct one. So instead of having to search each one differently, in the same time it would take you to search one, you can search all of them. I don't know how that would apply to the forecasting exactly. It's something I'd have to think about. I'm sure some people have thought about it, but in the forecasting spaces that I've seen, there's not a lot of discussion on that. And I'm curious. I mean, it's a good point. It's something that should be explored is, what is the path there? But I don't think for the most part that forecasting is a search optimization problem. I think, and this is where machine learning is changing things, because classically the way most forecasting, especially in weather, has been done is just known physics equations, which are complex but tractable, and they're just huge because you have so much data, right? All these pixels, multiple different atmosphere levels. It's a ton of data that we're not used to in like LLMs or other machine learning models. But the classic method was just you have to send it to a supercomputer. I mean, when I was at the weather wing, we collect data from all over the world. You do this step called data assimilation because you don't have the temperature at every point on Earth. So you have to sort of figure out, okay, over the middle of the Pacific where we don't have a sensor, given what we know about temperature around it, what is that temp? And for all the other weather variables. And then you pass that into a giant physics engine and it just plays that forward. But they're not perfect. They're slow. They're expensive because they run on these giant supercomputers. And so the machine learning, what has been demonstrated by various organizations like Google, NVIDIA has one, is that the machine learning models can do this much faster. They can do it on a laptop GPU and more accurately, which is crazy. We still don't fully understand why. There's some discussion of maybe it's something like an intuition is doing some of the work, but they're physically consistent and there's evidence they're learning the physical laws, which is the part that I'm really interested in. So I know that wasn't your question, but it's just interesting because like the different methods of solving the problem have totally different avenues of how the problem is being solved, if that makes sense. And so I don't think there's much research in quantum. I think it's an area that should be explored.
Gotcha. Well, so let's go back to just weather for a moment.
Yeah.
And this is something that, everybody knows about the weather because everybody goes outside every day or doesn't because of the weather.
Right.
But why does weather matter so much? And I know a little bit of the answer to that because becoming a pilot myself and learning about weather and, instrument flying and things like that, like weather plays a huge role in aviation. But I think that weather plays a bigger role in everything that just most people don't really realize. So why does weather even matter? And that's a huge question. So take it whichever way you want.
Yeah. And, this is where I'm thinking back to my days at the Weather Wing and in various government organizations that care a lot about how physics affects our world, but because they would be much better salesmen of this idea. The meteorologist guys at the Weather Wing, I'm thinking of Mike Wimmer, if you've ever met him over there. But anyway, weather, I'll preface it by saying I'm not a weather nerd specifically. However, one of the ways that it's really, really useful for us as a starting point is that if you want to predict stuff about our world, including things that are affected by humans, crop yields, all that, it all starts with the weather, like the state of our world. And it's also, and when I say starts with, it's not even necessarily that it's dependent on, it's just that one really nice thing about the weather is it's not dependent on things we're doing, maybe a little, right? Long-term, right? Stuff like that. But for the most part, whether or not there's a hurricane this fall isn't going to be affected by us. And so when you model it, you can mostly allow it to be a self-contained system. And that's a really convenient starting point because so many things are affected by weather that once you have that kind of squared away, you can then start this causal chain of forecasting what's happening in the world. So that's really my excitement about it and why we're starting with it. But to your point, I learned so much at the Weather Wing, and we're seeing it now with this causal effect that as we're modeling our product Deep Loom. So I like to think about it historically also. Like one of the big components of D-Day, for example, and I think there was a recent movie about this, or maybe there's one coming out. I've seen some ads for it, but it just so happens that because the weather tends to travel from west to east in that part of the world, and specifically like southeast. So when they were planning out D-Day, the weather was like they had planned it to go many times, but weather had stopped it for weeks, I think, maybe even months. And it just so happens that the Germans had a disadvantage because the weather travels southeast. And so in the UK, they had weather stations up in the northwest and they could tell what was coming down. And so the Germans just had no ability to predict the weather because they couldn't see it kind of coming. And so, that's the scale of, an invasion that defined this last century was defined by weather, right? If they had done it at the wrong time, the Allies might have literally lost D-Day, right? Which is crazy to think about had we not cared about that. And really, in some ways, not to get too aspirational about it, like understanding the weather, the tides, like how our natural world works is in many ways like what the long chain of science progress in our world has been. Really the invention of modern computing came about for physics processing, for doing weather modeling, for nuclear plume stuff that actually happened in the 50s with like ENIAC and some of those early computers. So I think that while the weather itself might not even be the most important thing, it was such an obvious way to know more about the world and like kind of the history that you and I are probably familiar with intelligence and reconnaissance. And the weather is just, it impacts everything, right? You look at Ukraine right now, it's the ground freezes and then it turns into this terrible mud and no one can do anything, right? Like knowing land, like the actual land inundation systems that they have to model that. Like at the Weather Wing, we modeled the soil because we don't know what people are using it for. That's not our business, right? But it can matter for all sorts of stuff. And I think even the Maduro raid was stopped by weather a few times. They were waiting for the weather conditions to be just right to make sure all of their systems and tools. And now that we've got all more fancy tech, right? Like maybe one day, when you were just the guy with a sword, it didn't matter that much if it was raining or snowing. But now we have so much of our modern warfare that's dependent on various detection systems that it might matter whether there are clouds or whether it's snowy or icy or whatever. So both for military and just as the kind of starting point for the way that everything else rolls out in our world, weather, I think, is just kind of that 0-0 origin from which everything flows.
Yeah, I could see that. And it definitely affects everything. So it's funny you said not to get too aspirational, but I would say like, let's get a little crazy because, to be an entrepreneur, you have to be a little crazy, right? Like no investor wants to hear that you're going to spend 5 years and, get to $10 million valuation, right? Like they want to hear like, I'm building $1 billion company because they want the founders to be just really focused on the crazy stuff. Right. So like for you, what is crazy? Like, what is that aspirational thing? Like when, like, let's fast forward, 5 years when Deep Bloom gets to, 5 years out, like, where do you want it to be?
Yeah.
Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. I mean, in all seriousness, I would like, in the same way that, I'm wanting to say Yashua Bengio, but it's not him. It's Demis Hassabis, right, from Google DeepMind. I don't know if you've seen the recent documentary. It was like a YouTube documentary. It's only like an hour. But he was behind the invention of the transformer and at Google DeepMind, and ultimately like this revolution in LLMs that we're seeing, and also AI in general, right? Like I tend to be a little bit of an LLM pessimist. Mostly just I think the nerd in me thinks, it's I liked AI before it was cool or something. I'm just that way. But I mean, you go and look at when he was trying to fundraise, and he was saying, hey, we're going to build like general intelligence. At least that's what they're trying to do. Whether or not LLMs are that or going to be that, who cares really? But the point, I mean, they certainly made some amazing progress. I think we can all agree with that. And but that was the pitch, and that was his vision, and just an incredibly smart guy, like math or a chess genius, winning championships when he was like 10. Just one of those guys. And he's going around Silicon Valley and London and trying to raise money. And then they would say, well, okay, what's your go to market in 2 years? And he's like, no, that's not what this is, But anyway, hearing him talk about what the point is, I think, again, being as aspirational as we can, it's like the parallel path to that. What he wants to build and what a lot of the AI researchers are trying to build is generalized intelligence or superintelligence. And I think what we're doing is something related using a lot of the same technologies. And what we hope is to build a digital twin of our world that is, it'll never be perfect. You can't have a sensor on every molecule, right? But to have, as we get more sensing technologies, more satellites, more just sensors everywhere, everything becomes cheaper, to just plug all of that into a giant mind that can process and roll that forward, because our world, with the exception of very minute, quantum things that may or may not be random, and the jury's still out on all of that, but that in a perfect world, if you know enough about the current state of everything, you can, and you understand the complex relationships between them, you can forecast that out. And again, will we ever get to the point where we're going to know what it's going to look like exactly in a year? No, I don't think that's possible. But in 5-10 years, could we have a really solid understanding of whether or not China is going to do something nefarious and invade Taiwan next week? Maybe we could, given the power grid dynamics and just these subtle things, right? I think to like Jack Ryan. Or is it Jack Ryan? What's the one with the guy from The Office? Which one is that? Is that Jack Ryan?
Yeah, I think that's Jack Ryan.
Yeah, you're right. He's like the NSA analyst or CIA or whatever he is. Right? Just like these little signals from everywhere, but then when you put them together, they aggregate into something that really matters. That's the vision, is that, and we're talking to various companies. We're talking to power companies because they have a big problem right now where they don't know exactly what the demand is going to be for their energy grid. And so it's very difficult for them with all the new renewables that are coming online. How exactly can you balance that? And it's a big shell game where every day, like I didn't know this, an army of analysts are working to figure out how do we optimize exactly the right generation on our power grid to match exactly what the consumption will be. And oh, by the way, if a cloud comes over your solar panels, well, they all go dead for an hour, right? Even though it's a good system, like we have to do this balance. And it's this giant balancing act that we spend billions on globally to just try to balance it, and it's never right. And so, you also look at, coming back to logistics with Werner, we got into this program by pitching. They do a lot of what are called deadhead miles, right? So they, take a shipment somewhere, they make some money, and then now that truck is, let's say, in Georgia or Atlanta, and they don't have a shipment to bring it back to Omaha. And so that's an empty miles. They just got to burn money or time and maintenance miles on the truck. And so, but if you knew in advance that there were going to be no shipments out of Atlanta on the way back, you might not have taken it, because then you can put that into account for, well, how much does it really cost for me to take the shipment to Atlanta? Because I have to take in the fact that I'm going to have to drive empty miles. Maybe you still do it, you up the price or whatever it is. But because we don't know enough about what the future holds, it means that we do a lot of things that are not optimal, that are not the best way that we can do them. And so that's the sort of thing that, on a more practical level in the near future, we think we can solve. But then in the long term, why couldn't we, especially with, it's all based on data sources. We think that's why there's huge military applications here. Why couldn't the Maduro raid have been optimized to make sure that, the weather, the social impact, like how people are going to perceive it based on the timeline of what others are saying, how our allies are going to respond. The human stuff gets really complicated, but we think, we think it's forecastable ultimately.
Yeah, the wetware always tends to be the hardest part. You got the hardware, the software, and then the humans, the wetware.
Right.
And that's always the hardest to predict because, well, humans do really weird things.
Yeah. Well, and the human brain is very complex, right? Like you were not going to model a human brain. We're not going to model 8 billion human brains in a machine learning model. I mean, maybe one day, but in aggregate though, people act much more predictably. So predicting what one person's going to do, very hard. Predicting what 1,000 people are going to do, not that hard.
Group dynamics, things like that. Yeah. Well, you mentioned the Werner. So, for people that aren't familiar, like the Omaha, startup ecosystem is kind of exploding right now. Yeah. And we've been a part of it for about the last 8 years when we started our first company here in 2018. And I mean, back then there was hardly nothing. Like there was not many events to go to. They weren't, publicized very well. There weren't a lot of groups of people getting together to talk about startups and entrepreneurships and things like that. And, fast forward to today, and some of the work done by like some of the community leaders, like Manny Cavedo, behind Nebraska Startup Academy. And now you got Charlie Cuddy and Alyssa running, Move Venture Capital. John Grange has been huge. Yeah. So a lot of these different things have like kind of exploded. And, over the last like 4 or 5 years, we've started seeing these like corporate pitch days. So they would bring, local startups into some of the enterprise companies around like Kiewit and Deloitte and stuff to pitch. But it feels like now, like what Werner's doing is taking it even further to like that next level. And they created their own accelerator. Yeah. So this is an interesting one. We've had accelerators in town, but they're like venture capital accelerators, things that are focused around that, where I'm not sure this might be the first one. There might be others I don't know about, but this seems to be the first one where an enterprise company has created an accelerator here in Omaha. So can you talk a little bit about just how you got into that and like what that process was like with Werner? Yeah,
I'll be, just almost embarrassingly a little bit. As you probably know, in the early days of a startup, when I first quit my day job in January, when our SBIR kicked off, then I got into full blown, all right, we're going to do fundraising, we're going to do all this stuff. And so it's just the shotgun approach of everything. And like I mentioned, we're starting with weather. There's really good weather models that we're going to extend on. But the truth is it's myself, one other engineer, and our CEO, who's still part-time. And so we didn't have the engineering staff to just start building what we want to build. And so we weren't sure, at first we started pitching what we want to do as the end game, but we realized pretty quickly, it's a harder sell, something a little more incremental. Okay, what can you do to sell something sooner, right? Kind of like Demis Hassabis. And so we were looking at energy logistics because those are so tightly coupled to weather. And we actually thought we were going to do energy first, but we weren't sure. And so I saw the Werner pitch day come up, I think just on LinkedIn or something from Alyssa from Nebraska Startup. And I said, well, hey, like we're thinking about energy, but you just got a shotgun, right? Like don't turn any buses down, right? Like I want to have, when opportunity comes, I want to have my bags packed. So let's just apply and see what happens. And so we continued on our way, didn't think much of it. And then there was a selection based on just some written submission material about what you wanted to talk about. And I think there were something like 50 companies that applied, somewhere north of that. And it was trimmed down to 5 or 6. And so Alyssa and the team at Nebraska Startup invited us to just give us some intro. Hey, here's how the day is going to go. I thought it was very interesting that when we did the pitch day, they had all of the startups there together. And so you get to see everybody else's startup or everybody else's pitch, which is normally not what you see. It was kind of cool to see the competition. But also you got to hear the feedback, right? Like some of the big wigs there, like their CIO, Dara, and he had some they weren't easy on him and not on us either, which I prefer, right?
Wait, so you're saying Dara didn't go easy on people? No. Anybody who knows Dara knows he's not a guy to go easy on you. And that's one of the things I love about him. He's like very, very to the point, and he'll tell you exactly how to improve, and like that's so fantastic.
Yeah, I mean it's so different than what you get a lot of times, even when I was a contractor, where you just kind of get, okay, sounds good, and then they go and talk and they're frustrated about something. It's like, let's just talk about it and get through it. Right. So anyway, I thought that was great. And so, we put together a pitch, and some of the feedback that we got was that on why we were selected as 2 out of those final 5 or 6 was that we had done a lot of market research on what does Werner do, what are their problems, what exactly is some of the issues they need to solve in their business, because we're still at that stage where we're not married to any specific prediction that we're trying to do as much as, hey, we are very good at prediction. That is what we do. We ultimately want to predict just about anything from publicly available data. And then we can sort of do a white glove and include your data to fine tune that model and predict maybe a more specific value to you. And so this is just one thing. But if that's not exactly the right value you want to predict, well, then we'll do something different. And so, supposedly that was one of the reasons we were selected, even though we're really early. We don't really even have the product yet. That I think just having a team of skilled engineers and scientists to predict something for you, specifically understanding your business model and knowing that it's not about what I want. It's not about the product I want to build. It's about what you need and what your business, what's actually going to make you money or save you money, right? So that's ultimately like what you have to put on the pedestal and not bring your own biases in.
So congratulations, you got accepted into the Werner Accelerator. So like, what's kind of the next steps? Like, are you sitting in their office? Is it like a 6-month program, 6-week program? What does that look like?
Yeah, so some of those are still open questions because I think it's the first one, so that we're figuring it out together, which has been great because Nebraska startup in coordination with Werner, I think everybody's pretty open to, we can just keep this flexible. That said, the initial kind of starting point, I believe, is 3 months. And because we're so early, the standard format of the MSA that they sent us is for like a statement of work, but we don't really know exactly what is going to be done. And so I think what's going to happen is we're going to spend the first couple of weeks just doing some interviews, working with their product leads and figuring out, okay, is this really what a predictive value that's going to be useful as a feed into the rest of your like optimization tools, right? Because they already have tools that help them. They don't do the forecasting, but they say, okay, our truck is in Atlanta. It needs to come back and have some loads. So can we string some loads through here, do whatever, so to feed into whatever products that they have. And of course, all of that stuff is kind of close to the chest. We don't know exactly what those are, even with the research that we did. And so I think, it'll just be some of figuring that out. But they're paying us a stipend. It's not enough to like support the whole business, but it's really nice because this then allows us to turn around and help with our fundraising and say, hey, look, we've got real traction. We've got a customer who's paying us. Now, granted, it's a pilot. We don't know if that'll turn into a long-term product relationship, but that's certainly the intent, right? I mean, what would be the point of bringing us on and helping us kind of grow the product and also see if it's a fit for them, if not for that relationship? And that's right. Our understanding of what the ultimate end game is on both sides. So, yeah, I mean, I think the next step is really just we're going to get some time in their offices. They've mentioned that, we can either be in their offices a lot or maybe just, once a week or something. For us, because the focus is how do we blow their socks off and come show them something that is just going to be so tailored to what they want, so helpful in making them more money. And that's all just customer based, right? It's like product market fit. Well, the market is the person at Werner who's actually going to use this day to day and then demonstrate that that's going to save them money at the end of the day, right? So I want to spend as much time with those people as we possibly can. Now, at the same time, you got to get back in the lab, so to speak, and crunch away. So I'm sure there'll be a fair bit of that. But we're actually looking for, because we don't have the funding right now to hire a team of additional engineers, and we're still executing on our SBIR, we are looking for a part-time machine learning engineer. So, I'm doing the architecture and the design, but having one more person to help with just the implementation day-to-day, because I'm still partially responsible for executing on that SBIR, is something that we're hoping to get on a temporary basis, at least for now, just to make sure we knock this out of the park.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you said, where you said you're going to spend a lot of time interviewing people and talking to people, because one of the things that, I learned early on in the entrepreneur journey is don't build what you think is cool, right. Build what someone will pay for.
Yeah.
And the only way you're going to know if someone's going to pay for it is to actually go talk to them.
Right.
And it's like, you can't just, sit in the lab with the blinders on and the shades down and just crunch on code because, it's cool, which every technical founder, I think, wants to do that, because that's what we do, right? Like, we build things. And but yeah, it's really interesting when you spend a year building something and find out nobody's going to pay for it. Like, it's cool and it's useful, but not quite to that threshold where it's solving that problem in a way where they're going to pay you for it.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I'm curious to get your opinion a little bit on this. Part of it's a fundraising story, but also part of it is just general what is interesting and fun, because like, one of the things that I'm really inspired by is like fundamental research, and like the old days of like Bell Labs, where they would just give a bunch of scientists like money and space to explore, and just the amazing stuff that comes out of that, and then gets turned into a product, maybe even by somebody else, right? Now, that said, they had a ton of money to spend, and it was okay that like 80% of the things don't turn into something useful, but the 20% pay for all of that, right? And not every startup has that possibility. But that said, like, one of the ways that I think about this a lot is what should excite you as the technician or as the technologist is like maybe some new way that you're building a thing, right? For us, it's this machine learning systems, graph neural nets. I don't want to dive too far into the weeds. In the way that forecasts can be done, that's exciting to me. I think at certain companies, that's exciting to maybe their CTO as well, right? The technologists on the other side. There's just something fun about it. But that's not what you spend most of the time talking about, right? It's like, hey, here's the special sauce, and it's cool and exciting to me, but here's what it can do for you, right? And so I don't know, sort of feel like you can have your cake and eat it too, as long as you're not spending all the time when you're pitching or talking to people focused on the exciting technology, and instead you bridge the two, right? Like, I don't know, so one interesting thing that, I think people may find unique about our organization is my co-founder and I, he's the CEO and I'm the CTO. We decided early on that those two roles are actually completely equal. The technology side of our business and the business side of our business have equal authority, because what we hate to see, and you see it at many companies, and some, of course, many companies do this well, is where the business completely overrides the technology to the point where what made the company special to begin with starts to erode over time. And the ability for the craftsmen, the people who are actually on the front lines building stuff, don't feel empowered to try new things or to innovate. But then on the other side, right, if the technology owns it, well then like nobody cares and nobody's going to buy it, right? So we believe strongly that like there is no one or the other, right? It's the tension between those two that makes valuable things for our world.
Yeah, exactly. And I was kind of thinking while you were talking about that, in terms of, how important is innovation? And I mean, obviously it's critical, right? Like we got to keep innovating and things like that. But the other piece too is also balancing not reinventing the wheel. Like if there's something that exists that solves the problem, it solves the problem. And if it's beyond a threshold, great. Do that.
Yeah.
Don't spend the time trying to innovate for the sake of innovation. Only innovate when everything else is failing up to that point.
That's true.
Because otherwise, it's like, I remember this joke that was really funny. Like, what's the difference between, like a computer scientist and a software engineer? And that is like the software engineer knows when to ship the code.
Right.
Like the computer scientist, they'll finish the product and go, oh, wait, I could do that better. And then they'll rewrite and refactor the whole thing. And they'll just keep doing that, for centuries and never ship anything to a customer. And so but the engineer knows when to ship the code.
Yeah. And inside in a single business, like the dynamics might change a little bit, right? Because of course there are many businesses that will be successful that don't do anything all that new. They just apply some existing technology to a problem nobody thought to apply it to before. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think, there's just different business classes, right? And it's like, what is the point of R&D? Because in many ways, and maybe push back a little bit. And again, I don't think you were saying this in all cases, but in many cases you have to explore even when that exploration you don't know for sure that it will be fruitful, right? But it just depends what your goal is, right? If your goal is, hey, I just want to make money, I want a simple, straightforward business where the whole point is I'm just taking this technology somebody else invented and I'm applying it to a new problem. And again, nothing wrong with that. I don't think that's the type of business we want to be long term, but that's okay, right? There can be different types of organizations that do different things. And some of the value proposition of different organizations is that they do R&D, right? Like, a lot of what the SBIR program is, for example, is the DoD, DOW saying, hey, we have these problems. We don't know what the heck to do about them. Somebody please come tell us what to do and present your solutions. And it's a very difficult thing to, when you're writing those, it's very weird because it's not fundamental research, but it's not just taking technology and applying it to a new problem. It's like this weird in-between world. And I think that's where a lot of tech businesses land, is this strange world where you can't say, I have no idea if this will work, and so I'm just going to throw stuff at the wall. But you also, if it were as simple as I'm just going to take this off the shelf and implement it, then there wouldn't be a problem for R&D anyway.
Right.
And so you have to sort of say, I have some justifiable reasons why this is probably going to help or solve it, but I don't know for sure, and I got to spend some time and money doing it. And I think that alone is its own skill set and its own capability that some businesses have as part of their thesis, some don't. And again, that's okay. But for us at least, we think that to continue adding that innovation is part of what will make our business successful in the long term as a technology business, not just as a business implementing other technologies.
Right, absolutely. And my comment before, I don't want to come across as anti-innovation, because definitely not in that case. One of the things and a principle that I've kind of tried to instill in every team that I've built over the last 2 decades is fail fast and recover.
Yeah.
Right? In more, other terms, like you know, even entrepreneurship and what we talk about in some of the entrepreneurship mentoring and stuff is like every day you're going to get punched in the face.
Yeah.
You know, and it's really like, and just know that that's going to happen.
Right.
Hopefully not physically, like more as a metaphor. Sometimes not, but
sure.
you know, hopefully more as a metaphor. But like, do you lay on the ground bleeding, or do you wipe yourself off and get back up and try again, right? So you're going to constantly have to just fail fast and recover. But you know, then to your point, it's like a calculated risk. Like you don't just throw stuff at a wall and see what sticks. Like you be very meticulous and measured about what you're doing. So yes, you are like innovating, but you're doing it in a way where your probability of success is higher than zero.
Yeah. I heard something recently that was like, science is just like the formal version of F around and find out, right? It's just like, that's what it is sometimes, you know, and again, like there's fundamental research where it really is like, hey, we're going to throw money and like a bunch of biologists go try stuff, all the way up to, and I think there's a place for that. And I guess that's really kind of my thinking is there's a whole spectrum from totally no idea if this is going to work, just trying to explore learn something about our world, all the way up to I'm not really interested in exploration, fully time to execute, right? And this is like a thing in reinforcement learning, which is how much do you learn before you start using that learning because once you start implementing, you're not learning. You can learn something about something different, but if you're talking about like the problem, the example is like for house buying, right? Like that's a classic example. How many houses do you look at when you're going to buy a house before you feel like you've got a pretty good bead on what is a reasonable price for a house, right? But also if it just so happens that the third house you look at is a screaming deal, that's a really awkward situation because you actually don't know if it's a screaming deal, but you might miss it if you don't choose to execute on it. And so this is just a common problem. That's why I think like as a country, as a community, right here in the Silicon Prairie in Omaha, you know, companies like Move, I hope there will continue to be investments across that spectrum because we need the people who are executing and just, hey, here's the tech coming out of maybe the research businesses and organizations and schools that we have here. Let's implement it and find a way that can make money. All the way down to, you know, somewhere in the middle like us, maybe slightly more on the R&D side, and then all the way to, you know, pure R&D, which is maybe more the world of academia, right? Maybe that's not a business at all, and that's okay too. So, yeah, I just think that you can have it exist across the spectrum entirely.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, here let's do one, and we'll throw one out there for project managers that might be listening. So, you know, when you talk about doing research, how do you keep people from hiding in research, right? Like if you've got somebody who, you know, their thing is, well, I need to research this.
Sure.
How do you know when to cut off the research and actually start implementing?
Yeah. I think there's so much there where, again, it's like the context of your business, right? Like we're doing this SBIR work. A lot of this phase one is a feasibility study. We're doing a lot of like lit review. We're doing exploration. And so, you know, I'm working with our chief engineer, Joel Heaps, who's an amazing engineer, you know, kind of a budding scientist. And, you know, I think honestly, if you don't have to be the most social person in the world, but I think a lot of it is soft skills. I can talk to somebody and know what have they been doing for this last week? Are they BSing and just like not working? Or are they actually like learning stuff, doing experiments, figuring out the problem? Because it's a genuine problem, right? You wouldn't have brought it up if it isn't. Because sometimes when you're in that discovery research phase, there's not a lot to show for it. And that's okay. But I do think there's a soft skill. I don't think there's like a hard and fast, well, if this is happening, then you know for sure that they're not. I think if you understand, I mean, that's maybe the biggest thesis. And I saw this so much when I was at the Weather Wing doing project management. And it's not just there, it's everywhere. I think you have to have a technical project manager. You got to know at least a little bit about what somebody's doing. Exactly. You have to understand what they're doing. You have to understand what the goal is, right? And that's what makes you not necessarily the same as the frontline engineers. Is like this bridging of like, what is the business level objective? And I know the tech. I might not know what line of code to write next, but I know what they did yesterday and why and how it pushed the needle on what we're doing, right? I've seen project managers who are non-technical, and so their engineers have to spend all day explaining to them what they're doing. Or they go to a meeting, and there's some business level change that requires a change in the tech stack, but that person can't speak to it at all, right? You don't have to solve the whole problem, but you have to be able to say, hey, just a heads up, that's going to cause this kind of downstream effect on the tech stack, and that might add time or cost or whatever. And if you can't do that, why are you even there, right? Because they would have to bring engineers. I saw many project managers where like basically any meeting that had any meat on it, they would have to bring a senior engineer from the team. It's like, well, then why are you there? Why do you exist if not to be an interface between these two layers as a node?
It's like in Office Space. I take the specs from the customer and give it to the engineers.
Exactly. And so what's the point of that? And but ultimately, to get back to your question, I think it goes back the other direction, which is if you can't tell when somebody is just BSing and skating versus actually taking care of business, that is probably a sign that you don't know enough about what's happening in like the technology that exists. I mean, I had one time at the Weather Wing where, and I'm not the best engineer. I consider myself like a mid-level engineer. But I had these guys who had been working on a problem for like 2, 3, 4 weeks, and I had a suspicion. I didn't know for sure that they were just kind of BSing. And so one weekend I was like, I gotta just like see what's going on here. And I crunched for about 18 hours over the weekend, and I didn't solve the problem entirely, but I made a bunch of progress. And so that at our next stand-up on Monday, when they said, yeah, we're still like, kind of hitting a wall, working on it. And I was like, oh, don't worry about it. Like, it's taken care of, right? And I didn't like scorn them or anything or say anything. It was just that little bit of, oh yeah, it's solved by the project manager who's not supposed to be as technical as we are. And I think that resolved a few things.
Well, how do you think AI is changing that? When you've got like non-technical founders that can, vibe code, to use the current verbiage, up some form of MVP or prototype, like, do you see that changing?
Man, it's so hard because we're just in this weird place where like in the limit, I don't know, like right now, it's definitely true that the more of an actual engineer you are, the more these tools just accelerate what you can do.
Yes.
Right. And if you're not that technical, like my wife, she's a PhD student. So in biochemistry. So she's, amazing scientist, a budding scientist, whatever, but she's not a technical like coder or anything. She's never done that. But a lot of what she does right now has to do with data types and everything, computer sciences and everything, right? And so she was working on some data analysis, and I showed her Claude Code. I was like, oh, you can just like do this. They have these expensive tools they have them using. It's like a pain. They're not using Claude Code there. And I was like, just use Claude Code, and sure enough, now she's like, kicking the crap out of all of her schoolmates because she's producing these plots and diagrams, and it's not really doing anything crazy other than just helping her visualize her data and maybe do some basic statistical analysis. But there's no limitation there for her, right? Like there's nothing that it's doing that she needs to be, there's no like production code, right? That's what we talk about a lot of times, like, oh, you can vibe code it, but it's not going to take you to production. So I think it's going to accelerate things just objectively in many places. But yeah, I do know that there are times when, I'm working with her and there is some problem and she doesn't know what pip install is or whatever. So it's getting caught in this weird loop because she's not putting in the right prompt to install some Python package or something. And so those are the sorts of things that I think we all as technical founders and just technical people know, oh, okay, that's where, they're going to get caught up. Mm-hmm. But I think that's only temporary. Like in the limit, why, again, like if you, this is now getting, again, like kind of philosophical, but there's nothing to me that is special about, wet meat in our head that silicon couldn't do in theory. And so if we assume that this is the worst it'll ever be and it'll just continue to get better, then yeah, I mean, in the same way that you have senior level folks at a business who are the business objective definers, who have a team of coders who can interpret that, I think we'll eventually get to the point where you don't have to do, you don't have to be good at code to be better at using AI. In the same way, you don't have to be good at code to be better at using an engineering team you hired, right? Like to say, like, just imagine if somebody said that, like, oh, to be a CEO, you need to be technical enough to know what to tell your engineering team. Like maybe in a small business, but eventually you get enough chains of people. Like the CEO of Merrill Lynch is not technical,
right? And
that's fine because he's got layers of technical people who can translate his business objectives into the technical solution. And eventually I think we'll get there. And it does worry me. I don't know what that means. As someone who loves technology and building, I don't know what that means for our future. But that said, in the near term, certainly, like, there is still a lot of value in having a technical person. And I don't think it's going to be any time in the near future.
Right. So you mentioned a couple of times your co-founder. So your co-founders, you have a business side CEO, and then you're the CTO on the technical side. For any SaaS company or, startup, do you think that's kind of required? Or like if you either have to be a dual hat CEO, CTO, or have the technical person on staff? Do you feel like we're still kind of there and Claude Code hasn't changed that yet?
I think it totally depends what your business thesis is, right? Like again, if you're one of those businesses where you're just taking like existing technology off the shelf and implementing it in a novel way because you want to implement it in your domain, right? You're embedded in insurance. You've been doing insurance for 20 years. You're going to take Claude Code and build some app that could have been built 20 years ago, but just nobody thought to do it. But now you don't have to hire a team, or it's cheaper, right? Maybe it would have cost too much to build it before versus what you're going to be able to sell it for. So the unit metrics just didn't make sense, but now they do. I think, you're still going to see a ton of that stuff. But yeah, I mean, if you're a technology company, you have to have both, I think. I suppose in theory, one person could do it, but at the end of the day, I mean, there's just too much stuff to do. I'm so, even him being part-time right now, like dealing with the taxes in the different states, dealing with, all the various submissions we have to do for our SBIR and all the government payment stuff, accounting and like hiring accounting people and managing.
Are you saying you don't like wide area workflow?
Oh my gosh. It is so terrible. Yeah. It's so funny. I was not going to bring it up because I was like, people won't know, but yeah, wide area workflow is the worst thing ever. For those listening, it's this government tool for invoicing and some other things. Apparently like a million other things too. You click on the guide button and it's got like a trillion features.
It's the catch-all tool that does everything not well.
Yeah, and it looks like it was built in 97. But anyway, yeah, so all of that stuff, I mean, just having a teammate in general, right? Even if he wasn't the CEO, but that just makes sense, right? To have somebody, like the way we treat it is eventually, like we take up all of the executive functions between the two of us now that will eventually be, hopefully, maybe a CFO, a chief revenue officer, chief information officer, right? So like anything that's more technical, like information officer, that stuff, that's under my umbrella. Maybe even COO a little bit, especially because I'm full-time and doing ops. Whereas, right, any of the higher level business stuff he does, and eventually that'll spread out. And really, I think even with AI, you'll still want those people at the higher levels of your organization just to have someone to bounce ideas off of. Nobody can do all of it on their own. Again, unless you've got like just a very straightforward business where all you do is build a basic app, you sell an API or something, and you're done. So it just depends on the scale of your business, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I definitely agree. And, it's also really interesting, in the early days, like with Fleet Defender, for example, we were, the founding team was a COO and a CEO. And then the two of us wore many different hats. And so, like I'm technical founder, so I was CEO/CTO, operator, finance, all that on the COO side. And so but we're getting to that point to where like we have to start building out the team a little bit more as you get into those later rounds and you're raising more money and you get to the point where you just can't dual hat anymore. Yeah. Like you just need dedicated functions in those areas, and using AI to help accelerate those areas is great, but like you still have divided focus.
And so much of it is still human. I mean, like we're doing a lot of pitching right now, right? We're trying to fundraise. And like, there's no AI help. I mean, AI might help us build the slides or improve some of our messaging here and there. But at the end of the day, like we got to show up and pitch. And so, again, having my co-founder Aaron is just so great for that. Like right now, we like to still try to go to both, or try to have both of us there, just because I could speak to the technical stuff and have questions and all of that. But ultimately, like that's bandwidth, because it's not just the half hour for the pitch. It's you're thinking about it, you're kind of prepping for it internally. You're also like interrupting your flow of whatever work you're doing. So, I mean, the real cost of every pitch is probably an hour and a half of work, even if it's just a half hour meeting. And ultimately, like I would love for us to get to the point where, we've talked about this, where I'm just full-time working on stuff. He's full-time out there making sure people know about our business, fundraising, whatever needs to happen. And so, again, there's just no AI stuff. Same with like marketing, right? Like eventually we're going to want to hire somebody to help us with marketing. And that's a lot of taste, right? Like that's not something AI can do. It can help you maybe build the marketing products, but it's not going to help you figure out what is the right like story branding for our organization.
You still need the human component, and you can augment that human with, a fleet of agents, but like you still have to have that human component to it.
Yeah, I think so. Especially because so much about human taste, I mean, just go look at us like celebrity fashion. So much about human taste is about like the story behind something. And so like in the same way, like I've got an Amish handmade wooden kitchen table that I love because I'm into woodworking and stuff. And why do I like that better, right? Like we have machines that can objectively make like a more perfect table. But I don't know. There's something about the craftsmanship that I appreciate about it. It's almost like art to me. And I think more and more we'll see that in various areas where to have something be generated by the mass producible version will be intrinsically less valuable. Even if it's not objectively less valuable, it's just because of preference and taste.
Right. No, absolutely. I mean, and going back to the table and stuff, I can't remember, there was like a quote that I recently heard, but it's like the uniqueness, like it's actually like the value is in the flaws.
Yeah.
Like, cause I mean, if it's perfectly perfect, it gets really boring really quick. It's the uniqueness of something. It's the flaws in it that give it the actual character.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it. But again, I'm very curious to see how this will pan out, because in business, that's not the case, right? It's like the at the end of the day, IKEA still exists, selling like perfectly manufactured pieces with the very cheap whatever. Because we have this amazing technology that, right, I saw this great thing a while ago. It was like Epicurious, one of those YouTube series. And they had all these experts in various like foods and drinks, and then they would show them like the cheap version and then a more expensive version of various products. There was one about bread. I know this is a tangent. I promise it connects. And there was this like bread expert. I don't know what they're called, right? And this person's supposed to guess like which one's more expensive and how much they cost. And the first one it's always like very easy, and it's like literally like Wonder Bread and like some beautiful loaf of something, I don't know. And he goes, like I could sit here and talk about how this is like cheap and terrible, but the fact that we can produce this as a species has meant that like we've been able to save millions of people from starvation, and like we can produce this, right? So like It has a place, and it's beautiful for it's like the A10, right? It's beautiful because of its utility. And so I don't know. I think there's a place for both, but it is weird. Like I saw a friend recently. She was reviewing applications for. She's got like a club at an academic institution, and she was reviewing applications, and one of them was clearly like AI written. And it turned into this like long debate, and she was like, well, I just don't know if I like the person who submitted the AI written one, even though they are more qualified. And I was like, that's really interesting. Like, what's wrong with it? Like, I don't personally find any offense to that, but I also do get it. Like, there is something about, I can tell you wrote this with AI. I kind of wish you would just written it yourself, even if that version would have been worse. And I don't know what that is in us. Again, for something purely taste, like if my wife wrote me, a nice birthday card with AI, okay, yeah, that's lame. But for like an application, why should I care? But right. I do get it. I don't care as much as other people, but I noticed that in myself, and I think that'll become more prevalent. That's my suspicion.
As long as it doesn't start with, I hope this resume finds you well.
Yeah, there are some that are egregious.
Well, awesome. So, a couple things you talked about. You said the term SBIR a couple times, and just so people that aren't aware, that's a specific government process that's set aside for small business. It's like Small Business Innovative Research, I think is SBIR, right. And then there's like small. What's STTR? That's where you partner with a university. It's like
tech transfer. I think,
something like that. And so like, by the way, they just re-up the Small Business Act that authorizes SBIRs for the next 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, there was a big fight in Congress about it. The Appropriations Board. There are like these SBIR mills where people are just putting in. It's not really helping the small businesses like it's supposed to. So they got that worked out, and then apparently, I guess when those committees, when the House and Congress both agree, or the Senate, then it just sits, and if it doesn't get vetoed after like a month or 2 weeks or something, it just becomes law. And so I think they were worried because right now some of the stuff that's happening with Congress, and I think President Trump is not signing new bills. So they're worried if they took it to his desk, he'd veto it, but if they just let it lay, it'll just automatically happen. So I think that was the in between, the compromise that worked out. But yeah, no, it was scary for us because we're really relying on that phase 2. And so, up until a couple days ago, the phase 2 literally didn't exist as a program. So, but it's been an amazing program for the country. And I think everybody knows we need to keep it around. And from what we could tell, looking at the debates, it was never, will this program exist or won't it? It was just some of those details about making sure it's not abused.
Right. No, and I mean, it's funny because the Navy, they publish like everybody that gets selected for their phase 1s and phase 2s. And if you go look at their phase 1 selections, it's literally the same five companies.
Yeah.
And they're winning, probably 50-60% of all the different solicitations that are out in that set. And so it's, there's the SBIR mills and stuff, like all that stuff's got to really change so we can actually use it for innovation and not just these mills that know how to write proposals and, write compliant proposals that can get selected.
Right. Yeah, I'm a little bit torn on it. And I want to, I don't think this is the main thing we want to talk about, but just very briefly, because it's like the Pareto principle, right? Like some people are just really good at R&D, and if you're an R&D lab, why should that be wrong? But I think some of it is how many of them are actually, like if you're just good at writing proposals, but you're not actually doing the phase ones well, I think that is a big problem. And so that's why I think a lot of the focus was on how many of your phase ones become phase twos, because that's the evidence that you're not doing the phase ones right. But that said, I still think it's you should have the opportunity for smaller businesses. And I remember when my co-founder and I were looking at how is small business defined, it's like less than 500 employees and some crazy number of revenue. And it's like, that's not what I think about as a small business, but I guess compared to a lot of the big, government primes, it's still a small business. So we'll see. I haven't looked that closely at the changes, but so far the bit that I have seen is in the right direction.
Yeah, and it's also really interesting too right now with the current administration and the way that they have changed defense procurement.
Oh yeah.
Like there's not a lot of dollars going into the R&D. They're kind of transitioning to like, we want you to build it using venture capital,
right,
and then we can like dual use it and use it, on the defense side. And so, how are you looking at that? We started, Fleet Defender on the government side, commercialized it, went to the commercial market, but stopped working with government just because of funding lines and things were changing as administrations changed and things. But then just this year, we won, a large government contract to kind of go back into that defense space. So now we're back to the true dual use kind of definition of, commercial and government. How are you looking at that? Because you started with an SBIR, but now clearly you're looking at commercial markets like with the Werner Accelerator and things like that. So what do you see the balance in your company? Like, are you wanting to be more defense? Are you wanting to be more commercial? Or is it truly a 50-50? You've got a dual approach?
Yeah, I mean, in the kind of midterm, just practical sense, hey, wherever there's traction and we can find a use case that fits, we'll follow that, right? But again, my personal view is I would love to see this in defense, because I think defense has the special set of data to really make use of something like this in its kind of fully realized form, whereas the commercial version is more, yes, there's global prediction, but you really maybe care about your specific prediction, and so you're just pulling that specific API, which is still great. I mean, I think it's cool, but I just really think, given the full backing of like a big DoD project, this could be something really amazing, especially with the big push that the CDAO and other, kind of progress organizations in the DoD are working on. Like right before I quit my day job to start Aulendur, one of my last roles was as the chief engineer for digital and AI at SAIC, and that group was doing a lot of like retrieval augmented generation and stuff. And so one of the things, it's funny enough, I was working at DITRA with this contract, and one of the things that many of these bigger organizations like Fourth Estate stuff were working on, and they were hearing from the broader DoD, Secretary of Defense, all of that, or Secretary of War, was basically all of these data sets that are kind of siloed in these various organizations. They wanted them to sort of bubble those up to the surface and make them discoverable through like an API. So like DITRA has an API for all their data, AFTEC has an API for all their data. And I mean, that's the perfect kind of starting point and transition to something like what we're talking about, which is how do you actually make sense of it? There's too much data for anybody to just explore. And these agencies know this, right? Like at AFTEC, it was always a big topic of, okay, sure, we've got this like larger strategic global monitoring mission, but can any of this data be used for like the COCOMs to help them today do something useful as like a layer or whatever? And so there's that like more straightforward software engineering and like reconnaissance problem. But yeah, I mean, given all of that data being available, how useful would that be for like a global model? Because they've got crazy data sets that, of course, commercially and publicly we don't have. But it was a little bit roundabout way to get to the main meat of your question. Yeah, I mean, I think that, like you said, the dual use situation right now is very interesting. So, we have the SBIR, and in some ways, though, that SBIR, depending on how things go, I think it may not lead directly on its own to a larger contract with the DoD. There's this more specific thing we're building, which is, again, the nuclear plume modeling. But the technology under that is really what we're saying is the value that we're getting out of working with them and the thing we're building. And that can be used for this larger deep plume model. And so for them, they're just concerned with the nuclear plume stuff. And so they don't really see, I don't think there's a direct connection for how we then sell that to the government in this broader sense. And that's where the capital comes in of, okay, we're going to dual use it and turn it around, build this larger product, but we need the money to do that engineering work because they're not going to give that to us through the SBIR. They expect us to deliver this more specific product. And that's what the money is for, and that's what we'll spend those engineering hours on. And that'll help build this kind of kernel, if you want to think about it that way, this model. But that model then needs a bunch of additional engineering work to do the rest of what we want. But yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing a lot of, with Palantir and Anduril, that this is the new paradigm, which is I know what the government, we started the Business to Government Guild, the Omaha Business to Government Guild. And last month I was speaking there. And, we had several people from the government and also startups in the room and people who worked at contractors. And, I asked the room, I said, how many people have thought to themselves while they're working with the government, like this customer has no idea what they actually want? And we got a lot of hands, right? And I just think it's a common problem because they don't know the art of the possible. They don't really even know what to ask for. And that, I think, is more than anything Anduril's value proposition. Like that's their thesis is we know what they want better than they do because we know the technology enough to know what could even be built. Like if you don't know, right, it's like, Ford said, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have told me they wanted a faster horse. So if you don't know that a car can be built, you'll never ask for that, right?
Right.
And so I think that's like the core point here is that you need VCs to sort of dream big with you and to say, look, I believe that the government wants this. They don't know that they want it yet, which depending on who you talk to, if they don't have military or DoD experience or just government experience, I feel like they kind of think that you're being a little bit hubristic when you say that. But anybody who's worked with the government knows like, oh yeah, they don't know what they want, right? And like, if you can make the case that they want it, like government acquisition is very complicated. And yet, if a general shows up to a trade show with some cool new missile from Anduril and wants 1,000, he's going to find a way to get 1,000 next month, right? Like, so it can be not complicated if you instill enough desire in the opposing party in the government. And so I think that's something that we would like to do is we build this thing, we get the venture capital to see the vision and invest in it. And but that requires a venture capital community and ecosystem that understands what any of that means. And that's part of what the Business to Government Guild was. And that's part of the issue I think we're seeing here in Omaha is that we've got great venture capitalists. I don't know that they have a ton of experience with the DoD. We're hoping to expose them more to some of that and bridge those communities because we got Stratcom here. So many smart people coming out of the military community and so many great startup ideas and technologists as well as the venture capital and just like, let's merge those because why couldn't this be the next Austin or DC or, wherever?
Right. No, absolutely. Well, awesome. Thank you for coming on the podcast. I think we can wrap up with that and good luck at Werner. Like that's super exciting. They've been an investor and a customer of ours for many years. We absolutely love their team. So I think you're going to have a lot of fun there.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. Thank you for bringing me on and for kind of taking us under your wing a little bit. You guys have blazed the trail with Werner. And so we're hoping to follow in your footsteps a little bit. So thanks,
awesome.
Derek.
All right, cool. Thanks.